All right, everyone, welcome back. Alex Goldner from the stands here, joined by who I think is one of the biggest prospects in Australian MMA today, Dom Fan. Dom, thank you very much for joining us here on a very nice Sunday morning. I'm sure you'd much rather be at the beach or something like that, but how you doing today, man?
Thank you for having me, bro. I'm doing great.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so I want to sort of go back to the beginning, and if you can, I want you to walk me through how did you first become introduced to martial arts? How did your journey as a martial artist begin?
Um, I'd say I started when I was 17, but I've always kind of had an interest in martial arts. Um, yeah, I walked into an MMA gym, um, got in love with it straight away. Lost interest in everything else in my life except MMA. And just decided from then on, like that's all I was going to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah. One thing that, I've seen, a lot with, particularly young martial artists when they first get started is that they can be their own harshest critic, during training or during camp, preparing for, a comp or a fight. And this can sort of lead to them, putting additional pressure on themselves, both in the training room and when it's time to compete. Is that something you experienced before, either when you were first coming up or, during your amateur career where you were putting a lot of pressure on yourself in training and, being a really harsh critic of yourself?
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely something I've always done. I've gotten better at dealing with that. Like the more I've grown as a martial artist. It used to be really bad. It used to be when I would compete in a jiu-jitsu comp, if I didn't win, you couldn't talk to me for the next 2 weeks. Like I was the worst person to be around. Um, I would just beat myself up really, really bad. Um, Now I understand losing for what it is. It kind of like fuels the next victory. And I think of it in a more positive mindset in the way that, like again, like any mistakes that I made there in that match or that fight are gonna help me progress because I can now fix those mistakes before my next fight or match.
Mm. Do you think that getting better at dealing with that has come from, just you becoming a little bit older, or do you think that's just come from experience in the game, leaning on the coaches and teammates around you?
A bit of both for sure. Yeah, I've got an awesome team around me. Um, uh, I get a lot of mentoring from like Steve Compton, my head coach, um, and he really teaches me how to deal with that stuff and how to kind of look at the big picture. Like I think you'd struggle to find a UFC champion that hasn't lost in some way or another in their career at some point. Like even like Habib, like
Hmm.
29-0, like he lost while he was fighting Sambo,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that that played a huge role in him then going undefeated in MMA. So yeah, more than anything, the influence around me for sure.
Yeah. So seeing you after your last fight, Dom, you were maintaining a really, almost sort of fun energy, while the ref was sort of, sorry, not the ref, while the doctor was, checking you out, making sure you're okay. You were being like, look in my eyes, let's have a little dance. And,
Yeah.
I wanted to know, does sort of keeping the fight game fun, in a way, does it make it easier to go through the fight game, the pressures of training camp, the pressures of competition? Because, obviously, I'm sure at times, you're not always like that, but does sort of having that fun side, keep this as something you enjoy rather than just something you have to do?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said before, like it's one of those things that I progressed a lot on throughout my career. I remember when I first had my first amateur fight, I had this idea of how I needed to look, like everyone's watched those Mike Tyson videos of like, oh, this is Mike Tyson in the lead up to a fight. He's so serious, he's eyeballing his opponent. And like I think everyone thinks that that's what you have to be like. But I think there's only a small portion of people that are like that. I found that that doesn't usually work very well for me. I think I get in the habit of kind of almost planning what I'm about to do, uh, even in the fight if I do that, as opposed to reacting and being like on the fly. Whereas if I let myself be kind of a little bit more impulsive, like whatever pops into my head, that's what I start doing in the fight. Whether it's in the lead up, like me like laughing and smiling, Or it could be like the same as when I'm in the fight, like seeing a jab and dodging the jab as opposed to like thinking about a response that I need to do, you know? Um, yeah, so for me, like fighting is something I do find fun. And whenever I've tried to put on that like serious persona, it hasn't worked. If anything, it also gives me confidence when I see someone else trying to do that, you know, because I know that that's what they're trying to do. They're not thinking about the fight, they're thinking about how they're looking in the fight. And that for me is always like a huge mental edge.
For sure. You kind of talked about it earlier that, if you had lost a jiu-jitsu comp, you maybe weren't the best person to be around for the next 2 weeks. So, when you had, your first loss in your amateur career in MMA, a lot of fighters that we've spoken to, they've said that in a way it was almost a blessing in disguise because it sort of removed that pressure of I have to remain undefeated, I can't lose a round, I can't lose a minute, and it kind of allowed them to fight a little bit more free moving on in their career. Was that something you experienced after that sort of first amateur loss in MMA, or was it a little bit different for you?
Yeah, no, for sure. I experienced nearly everyone around me telling me I should quit MMA. And that amount of like doubt, I don't think I'll ever be able to have that same amount of doubt like later in my career. And people around me um pointed out like, fuck man, this is almost a superpower. Like you've literally hit like rock bottom, right? So when I lost my first MMA bout, um I had also had one MMA bout before that, and I'd also had a kickboxing bout, which I got knocked out in. So in my first three fights, I got knocked out twice. In the first minute, I got absolutely the worst start to MMA that you could possibly have. Um, and nearly everyone around me was telling me I should quit at that point. Um, and I was able to persevere through that. I was able to kind of like still see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, hey, like if I work hard enough at this, I believe that I can accomplish great things. And like every day, I turn more and more of those guys over. Like nowadays, uh, than more people around me think that I'm going to definitely make it in the UFC than people that don't think that. So many of the people that I used to train with that used to tell me like, hey man, maybe it's time to like hang it up, but like are in that category now where they're saying like, man, you're definitely going to make it to the UFC, like you're awesome, like so yeah, I've always liked doing that. I've always liked turning people over. And that's what I got out of that initial loss is that like, oh, okay, so now I've already felt what it's like for everyone to be doubting me. If I had that happen later in my career, maybe I had gone 6-0 in my first few fights, and then after that I had gone on a big losing streak. It might have got to me more. Like people saying like, oh, I think it really helped me.
For sure. So, and I think that's a really great point that you raise. A lot of fans, a lot of fans, as soon as someone has a first loss, they go, "Oh, it's time to quit, retire, retire." And I like to always bring up the point. Max Holloway in his first four UFC fights went 2-2,
Yeah.
goes on to become one of the greatest featherweights of all time. So, Dom, a bit of a different question I had for you. I've asked this for a few fighters, but what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about you when they find out that you're a fighter? Because from a few of the fighters that we've spoken to, they've said that, oh, some people assume that, when they first meet them, that they're just going to pop off as soon as anyone says something and they're just going to start swinging punches wildly. But, what sort of misconceptions do you think people have about you, when they find out, about your chosen career path, being a fighter?
I'd say that one that you just mentioned is a pretty fair one. I think most people assume that fighters will be, like you said, like a little bit violent, a little bit like a little bit hot-headed, but I'm completely different to that. Especially like my fighting style is very calculated. Uh, I'm I'm thinking through a lot of the stuff that I do, and I take that approach into life. I don't think I haven't been in a street fight since I've started training. Like I've had many opportunities to, but I definitely think the more you fight and the more you like train martial arts, the more you really understand that you don't understand the other guy, like
Mm,
for all you know, like they could be like a fucking weapon, they could have a knife on them. There's so many
mm,
variables that you can't plan for. And I tend to steer away from that. And also I don't have any like ego that needs to be like proved, like when it's pretty clear that someone's just trying to like flex on me, they're trying to like look good in front of their mates. Like it makes no difference to me if they look good in front of their mates. Like I don't need to fight them for it.
yeah, yeah. You don't need to fight them to prove that you train the better UFC, as I'm sure they'd
Yeah.
be saying at 2 o'clock in the morning. But
Yeah.
look, man,
Yeah.
couple of last questions from us. We don't want to keep you too long, but there is an Eternal card, scheduled for towards the end of the year. Were you looking to jump in on that? And if so, did you have a particular opponent in mind you were wanting for that, or are you just going to kind of see what happens, over the next few months?
100%, 100%. I want to jump on that. I we've kind of been playing around with a few different names. I really want to verse someone in the top 10 on the Tapology rankings. Um, I want to surprise people. I want to fight someone. I want to be the underdog, and I want people to go like, "Ah, shit, okay, this guy's definitely going to lose." And then I want to come out there and smoke them in the first round. Um, that really interests me at this point. We've been given a few names. There's a few guys on the outside of the top 10 that I've been offered, and I can understand why people in the top 10 wouldn't want to fight me. As in, there's not a lot for them in that fight. That it looks like they're just like punching down for no reason. Um, and if I can't get anyone in the top 10, then I'll take something outside of it. But yeah, I really really want to push to try to fight someone in the top 10. That would be perfect for me right now.
Mm. And final question for me today, man, is, Team Compton has been on, a tear, particularly the last sort of 2 years. It kind of seems like over the last 2 years, they've really just seemed to start a sort of taking over the local scene. And now, with Tom Nolan heading to the UFC, now beginning in the international scene as well. But for you, I was just wondering if you can talk to, the impact that, the coaches and the team at Team Compton have had, on your development as a martial artist, from your early days to now. If you can just sort of speak to how they've impacted you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, Team Compton is without a doubt going to be the biggest gym in Australia, indisputably within a year. Okay. The room is absolutely stacked full of killers that are fighting in the early pro scene, but are the quality of people that are international. And it won't take long for us to all kind of emerge from that spot. We have more and more people like inquiring every day from other gyms, like high level guys that want to come in and they want to come train, and that they're seeing what's happening. So like yeah, the team is feeling pretty unstoppable, and it's only going to get more from here on out. And yeah, that definitely all does come from head coach Steve Compton. Like his view on martial arts and fighting and combat is is so unique, and he's got this unique ability to really tailor a fight game and a skill set towards each individual fighter, and that's something really really hard to do. Like I would say the vast majority of coaches can, like some really good coaches can teach you to do exactly what they're doing, but it is so rare for a coach to be able to teach you something that is outside of their own game, purely just because they know it will work for you.
Mm.
And that's one of Steve's talents. Like he could absolutely teach anyone. Yeah, like when I first started with Team Compton, I again like this was at a period where I was coming off that almost record breaking loss on Eternal. I got knocked out in the first 10 seconds. It was pretty savage. And like I was so confident that I didn't have any ability to strike. And I wasn't going to be able to learn to strike. Pretty much everyone taught my previous coaches had told me I was uncoachable, and I could not be coached. Within a few weeks at Team Compton under Steve Compton, I had made huge gains, absolutely huge gains. It became very evident, like, okay, yeah, fuck yeah, I can make a career out of this, like without a doubt.
Definitely. Well, Dom, thank you very much for joining us today, man. We really appreciate you giving us some time. Wishing you all the best, man. Especially we would love to see you on that Eternal card at the end of the year. But if not, I know that we're stacked to see what the future brings, and I'm confident that we'll see you in the UFC or one of the big promotions over the coming years, man. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'd love to talk to you again in future.
Awesome. Cheers, bro.
Awesome. Thank you, man.